Okay, we're getting started. If you haven't already done so, you need to sign in for whatever class that you are here for. I'm so glad to see all of you here. I know some of you are able to get extra credit for this. Somebody said they were able to get extra credit in a couple of classes, and they asked about that. I would suggest you sign in twice with each class, designated by your name so that, you're not skipping over in the other class. Okay, today we have Dr. Caudel here. He is an assistant
associate
director of the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2009. He is an international speaker and a neurodivergence advocate. He's had a number of careers. I thought this was really interesting. A number of careers over his lifetime, including videographer, soldier, journalist, photojournalist, magazine editor, public affairs specialist, and even a truck salesman. He has his Ph.D. in physics from Vanderbilt University. He is a founding member of the Vanderbilt Autism and Neurodiversity Alliance. And please welcome Dr. Caudel.
Thank you so much. Can I see a show of hands here? How many people know what Asperger syndrome is? So we've got some people. So for those of you, Asperger syndrome is no longer an official diagnosis, but back in 2009, you could still get the diagnosis. Today, it's rolled into ASD, autism spectrum. The official word is disorder, but those of us on the autism spectrum refer to it as a difference because disorder can sometimes be a bit misleading. Now, there are a lot of people on the autism spectrum that are disabled to one degree or another, that struggle with things that most people do not struggle with. But autism is more than just a disability. When I'm explaining my autism to people, what I like to start off with is say, look, I am a human being with all the complexities and nuances that brings. There's a lot of variability within humanity. There's a lot of, different ways of thinking and different skills and struggles. And so in that regard, I'm just as human as everybody else. But in some very important fundamental ways, my brain is wired differently than most people. About 2% of the population is in the autism spectrum. And that difference means that in a lot of situations, I might be thinking about things in a different way. I might be seeing things in a different way. I might be using language in a different way. And that causes a lot of struggles for anyone who's ever been from one culture or one background and gone into a place where you are the minority, where everybody kind of like talks differently, or people see things differently, or they have a different commonality of basis of understanding and experiences and stuff. You know how hard it can be to kind of fit in, and you know how hard it can be for like misunderstandings to go in both ways. Well, that's certainly true of people who are neurodivergent. Now, neurodiversity was a term that was coined in the 90s to kind of bring rise to this idea, actually more so to push back against the myth that there's such a thing as a normal brain, or there's such a thing as a typical brain. There's variability in human beings. That's just, no two human brains are exactly alike. One person might love chocolate ice cream, the other person might like vanilla ice cream. Somebody might have a natural aptitude for math. Other people could like really, really struggle with math. Variability is normal, and neurodiversity, which is sort of coined to bring attention to the idea that there's no such thing as a normal brain or typical brain or the root standard. But within the neuromajority, people are generally similar enough that they can kind of connect with minimal difficulty and kind of understand and communicate with each other with minimal difficulty, providing they speak the same language, obviously. To compare and contrast to that, people who are neurodivergent is one or more ways their brain wiring is differently enough for most people that they struggle with things that are kind of unique to their neurodivergence. And some of the more common ones that you might be aware of is like dyslexia, or ADD, or ADHD, or Tourette's syndrome. Now, for decades and decades, science and research has basically looked at people who are neurodivergent, such as people with autism or people with dyslexia or dyspraxia or dyscalculia or whatever. It basically looked at us from the perspective of what's wrong with us, what's defective about us, what's inferior about us. And there are things that I struggle with that most people have difficulty even wrapping their heads around. How could anybody struggle with this? This is so natural and easy and obvious and simple for me. I can't even wrap my head around how anyone could struggle with this. But yeah, for me, I have to work really, really hard just to poorly imitate what other people can do effortlessly and simply. You know, when you think about dyslexia, if people know anything about dyslexia, they generally think, okay, those are people who have problems with numbers and letters getting mixed up or something. It can be kind of hard for them to read or hard for them to kind of spell. You know, all of these neurodivergences, we have struggles or challenges that people might be familiar with if they know about neurodivergence at all. But if that's the only way you look at somebody is what did they struggle with, not only do you have an inaccurate picture, you have a very unfair picture. Just imagine your own life. Everyone here has things that they struggle with or things that they're not good at. Imagine you were known as the person who's bad at this. And that's all people thought about you. And that's all people like considered when they tried to interact with you. It would not be fair and it would be highly inaccurate. One of the interesting things about neurodivergence is that there are also, researchers are more and more finding that there are also cognitive strengths, cognitive gifts. One of the smartest people I've ever met, and I work at Vanderbilt. I have a lot of friends who are scientists, chemists, biologists, physicists, astrophysicists. So I've met a lot of smart people. One of the smartest human beings I've ever met was severely dyslexic. And I loved this guy because his brain was a problem-solving machine. You could hit him with a problem, he would come up with a highly innovative, novel solution. And if you shot that solution down for whatever reason, he had another one, and another one, and another one. And yet the first time I saw him spell fire, a simple four-letter word, F-I-E-R, on a piece of paper, something in my brain broke. Because I was like, how could somebody so smart struggle with something so obvious? Well, that's my misconception because I don't have dyslexia. And so I don't have a problem spelling and stuff. But I could clearly see that he was smart despite the fact that obviously he struggles with something that I don't struggle with. Each of the neurodivergences are like that. People who are autistic, it is a spectrum. Sometimes, how many people here could have guessed that I was autistic by looking at me? Okay. How many people here are a little confused or skeptical at the idea that I could be dyslexic? It's okay. You could be totally honest. Well, bless your hearts. I appreciate you guys giving me the benefit of the doubt. I encounter a lot of people out in the world who are highly skeptical at the idea that I'm autistic, in part because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about autism. They see what Hollywood tells them is autism, and Hollywood gets it really, really, really wrong. In fact, when I first found out that I could be autistic, I got offended. Someone told me that they thought I had Asperger syndrome. And I got really mad at that because I thought that was wrong. And I went to research it because I can't just tell you you're wrong. I have to quantify your wrongness. I have to come back with a point-by-point list so you can fully appreciate and absorb in what way and in what level that you were wrong. And as I started researching Asperger syndrome, I realized two things. One, I had a lot of misconceptions about autism. And two, I could actually be autistic. So much so that eventually I sought out a formal diagnosis and got a formal diagnosis for Asperger syndrome, and then went back to my friend and I told her, you know what, it turns out you were right. And she said, I was just being sarcastic. One of the things about autism is that we have difficulty reading whether someone's being serious or not. Autism is in part a social disability because we have difficulty with nonverbal communication. We have difficulty understanding another person's point of view or anticipating another person's point of view. You know, there's a lot of social norms and stuff in how we talk to each other and how we interact with each other, things that you say, things that you don't say. For those of you who do not have a social disability, if you're meeting a new person and you're kind of testing the waters with subject matters and stuff, you can kind of pick up pretty quickly if you start getting into an area that this person might be a little sensitive about or would prefer not to discuss, or might actually be angry or offended or saddened, and you can kind of pivot. We have difficulty with that. Sometimes we don't know that we've crossed a line until people are screaming and yelling and throwing things at us. And that's usually not a good time to realize that you've crossed a line. You really want to notice it in the beginning. we can come across as being very selfish or self-centered, which is another misconception. A lot of human beings have this amazing like psychic ability where they can just walk into a room and see a group of people and through their nonverbal body language, pick up on what their emotional state is, mirror that emotional state and join them in a sort of unity where they're all feeling the same sort of emotion and responding to them appropriately. You know, so if they come in and someone's like devastated or somebody's like really stressed out or somebody's like really sad, they can immediately get sad and step in and just sort of like coax them. And that gives one another the impression, oh, this person cares about me. Then somebody like me comes in and I'm whistling and smiling and I look over and I'm like, hey guys, what's up? And now everybody thinks I'm a monster because I don't seem like I care. It's not that I care. I'm just literally not getting the message. I need somebody to set me down and say, hey, such and such's aunt just died and she's like really upset and we're trying to console her. And I'd be like, oh no, that's too bad. I can be very sympathetic, but it's not so easy for me to be empathetic because I'm missing some of the wiring that kind of helps with that. But that doesn't mean I don't care about people. I actually care very, very deeply about people. You know, when I got to college, it was the first time when I decided to give this college thing a try in my 30s and I discovered science. It was the first time I found something that actually fit the way my brain works. My brain's a bit of a problem-solving machine too. It's really good with numbers. It's really good with math. It's really good with logic. I have to be good at logic because my instincts are terrible. And how do you make sense of the world and make good decisions? If you don't have good instincts, logic was the only thing I could kind of fall back on. But while I was in college and discovered like physics was the first time I found a job that kind of fit how my brain works. All of my strengths were valued and treasured. None of my weaknesses mattered. You don't have to be the life of the party to be a good physicist. You don't have to be able to go with the flow in a conversation to be a good physicist. Like, you know, I have hyper focus, attention to detail. I don't get bored. I don't get frustrated. I can plug away at a really difficult, complex problem for days, weeks, months, and the whole time I'm living my best life. In fact, I don't like simple problems because my brain is always on and I have to be working on something. It's just one of those crosses I have to bear. And so if I have a simple problem to solve and then I solve it, I'm just kind of like, I'm immediately in search mode looking for another problem to kind of work on. And science has a lot of like really complex multi-year problems, which is perfect for somebody like me. I would have happily been an experimental physicist the rest of my life. And it would have been a dream come true for me. But on the day I graduated, my boss came to me and said, I'm opening up a center to help autistic adults and I want you to be the director. And I immediately said yes. And then I mentally crapped myself because I had just spent a decade preparing to be a physicist. And I had never put any thought or effort in what it is like to be a director. As an autistic, very literal thinker, I thought, okay, a director is someone who directs things and tells other people to do things. Yeah, I could do that. I could probably figure that out. I'm still high off of my PhD in physics. I felt like I could learn anything if I just put my thought and effort into it. And luckily for me, I had a lot of great role models, other directors in Vanderbilt University and some other places that I could talk to, ask them some probing questions and kind of get a sense of what their philosophy is and how to do it. It's from my point of view, it's one of the easiest jobs in the world. Is I get teams of people together and I get them to work on problems and do research, and then I get an unfair share of the credit. I love science and I love being able to learn things. So I've got like dozens of groups working on things in parallel, and so I'm constantly learning vicariously through them. It's turned out to be an amazing job. But the reason that this job was so important to me, and the real reason why I get so much fulfillment out of this job, when I found out that my weirdness had a name and that there were other human beings out there who go through the same sorts of things that I go through or I went through, it broke my heart. My first thought was no human being should have to go through that. And so the opportunity to step in any way, shape, or form to try to help other people, because I remember lots of times when I desperately needed help and I didn't have anything. I had nothing but misunderstandings and misconceptions and anger and hatred. And that was a tough way to live. But there were some moments when some kind-hearted souls stepped up and took the time to get to know who I really was and try to figure out where I was really coming from. And then were willing to answer my questions, which most of the time when I would ask a question, I would get the answer, oh, everybody knows that. that would break something in my brain a little bit. I have just demonstrated to you that I don't know that. And your answer is everybody knows that. How are you even capable of uttering that blatant falsehood that used to just kind of freak me out? Eventually, I came to an understanding that most humans have no idea why they do what they do. They just do what their instincts tell them to, and they just roll through life. They can't answer my question half the time because they themselves don't know. It's another beautiful thing about science, though, is that we do have researchers that are looking into the psychology of human social interaction and stuff. And so somebody like me can kind of study that sort of like through the back door. And the more I understand about people, the more I can kind of empathize with them, and the more I can kind of like relate to them and find the sort of commonalities that I have with them. So that was just a really brief like introduction about who I am and kind of what we're working on. I'll say one thing further about the Frist Center for itself. Over 80% of people on the autism spectrum are unemployed or underemployed, and this includes people with bachelor's degrees, graduate degrees. And so the main thrust of our work at the center, there's a lot of problems that autistic adults are struggling with. How do you help them find a way to successful independent lives? I think like if they have a good full-time job where they're accommodated and supportive, they're doing fulfilling work, if they have that, a lot of the other problems suddenly become a whole lot more solvable. So that's the hill where we planted our flag. That's the direction that we're kind of fighting this at. And so we're looking at what sort of technologies, innovations, ways of doing things can help autistic and neurodivergent individuals find and then thrive in meaningful employment. And as I said, everyone who with neurodivergence, they have strengths. Even level 3 people on the autism spectrum with like moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, entirely nonverbal, we're talking about people who are going to be on assisted living for the rest of their lives. Because of their autism, there are some things they can do as well, if not better than most people. And we see even in that part of the spectrum, if they have a job where they are being valued and appreciated, it does dramatically good things to their mental health and well-being. One story in Florida I can remember in particular, level 3 autistic fellow was in like his 40s and he was still living with his mom. His mom was taking care of him. They got him a job where he went to the bus station for 5 hours a week and cleaned buses. And because of his autism, he was very precise, very meticulous, did a fantastic job. The people there really valued and appreciated all the hard work and effort he was putting in making the buses actually clean and presentable and stuff. And so, you know, they're happy to see him and they're greeting him and stuff. And then he comes home. He's entirely nonverbal. His mom and him have never been able to have a conversation. But she said that his body language and his state of mind when he was at home went through a seismic transformation. He was suddenly smiling a lot more. She could catch him humming. She could tell his quality of life had improved immeasurably. Autistic people are still human beings. And like all human beings, we need to be a part of a group. We need to be seen and valued and considered to be a part of that group. That's just something we all have in us. Is by ourselves, we're kind of pathetic. We're kind of lonely. It can do terrible things to our mental health. There's a lot of misconception out there that autistic people are antisocial. Now, I'll say as a caveat to that, it is true. I do not need as much social interaction as your average person. I can go a weekend without laying eyeballs on another human being, and Monday morning I am bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I had a fantastic, fantastic weekend. I have some friends, if they go 6 hours without interacting with another human being, I think they want to eat a bullet. Like they just have this constant need for. I'm glad I don't have that. That seems exhausting to me. But on the flip side, social interaction is very hard and labor-intensive for me. You know, as I'm talking to you, I have to be trying to pay attention to your body language. I have to be paying attention to your tone of voice. When you say something, my brain takes the literal definition, and then almost in real time, I have to be like a detective trying to figure out, okay, did they actually mean what they said, or did they mean something else? Their eyebrow twitched when they said that. What could that mean? Let me ask a follow-up question. Let me ask a qualifier question. That gets exhausting. And at some point, I can't do it anymore. And I'm just like completely spent and exhausted. One of the greatest things about getting a formal diagnosis and meeting other autistic adults is I discovered I don't have to do any work with them because we speak the same language. I don't have to sit there and wonder, what did he say? What did he mean just now when he said that? He meant precisely what he said. because we're the only ones who use language properly. We speak in a very literal, direct manner, and we say exactly what we mean. And that can come across to other people is that we're blunt or direct or rude. I have frequently been told my whole life that I am brutally honest. That for me feels like a paradox. How could honesty be brutal? I understand now, I didn't understand then, is what they're actually saying is that hearing facts hurts. That was a really hard concept for me to internalize. When I first started to learn that about people, I was like, no, that can't be right. I got to go back to I got to get more data. That can't be the proper, it's on an intellectual level. I now understand I have to be really careful about what I say and who I say it to and which ways we kind of go. And I try to warn people, hey, I'm autistic. If I start talking about something that's inappropriate or something, please let me know. And I'll do my best not to do it again. But don't assume that it's going to be obvious to me, no matter how obvious you think it is that you are unhappy with what I'm saying. Don't assume that I know that. Don't assume that I get that. So I'm getting better at advocating for myself and trying to help people to kind of understand me. And one of the really great things about autism and all of these other types of neurodivergences is that if you can establish an honest dialogue with these people and just with some patience and understanding, you can make some great sort of connections. I'll open this up for questions in a little bit, but there's one other thing I wanted to say. The first time I got accepted by a community and people just accepted me and treated me as like a member of the family and was like inviting me out. We were doing things together and it felt so wholesome and awesome. And it was like nurturing a starved part of my soul. It was the first time I went to another country. I spent 6 months in Honduras. I got along fabulously with the Hondurans there. And for the longest time, I thought maybe they had some sort of enlightened, improved version of society that's just so much superior to our own. And maybe that's why I get along so great with them and stuff. But it happened to me again in Germany and Bosnia and Kosovo. And at one point I was joking, gosh, I have to go to another country before I stop getting treated like a foreigner. When I got my autism diagnosis and look back on it, I think I understand why that is. See, autistic people, no matter how hard we work on our social camouflage or our masking, to give you the illusion that I walk and talk and act like a normal person, so you will accept me and be more willing to like include me in the group or invite me out to the events or whatever, or consider me for employment. No matter how hard I work on that masking, sooner or later it's going to slip and I'm going to behave in an atypical manner. And you're probably going to tell that there's something weird about me. Or maybe I do a sort of a social faux pas. Maybe I put the wrong tone of voice when I make a statement that might come across as, I don't know, degrading or insulting or sarcastic or whatever, where my mask was like imperfect. And if you think I'm a part of your culture, like here in the US, I'm Tennessean. So you're like, he's a Tennessean, he should know better. We're very harsh and judgy towards one another within our own culture. But if you think I'm a foreigner and I act weird or unusual, you're much more likely to go, oh, this is probably because he's from the US. Or probably he's from the part of the world that he's from and stuff. I think the reason I got along with these people so great is because they had a little patience and understanding, and they gave me the benefit of the doubt. They didn't jump to conclusions. That's one of the biggest sins we do as human beings with one another, is that we get our cultures in line and we get very rigid in our sort of like how we walk and talk and act towards one another. And as soon as somebody steps a toe out of line, people have a knee-jerk reaction. It's like, you can't do that. You can't do that way. We're very harsh and judgy towards one another. And if I could just give one message to the world, we shouldn't be so cruel to each other like that. We shouldn't be so rigid like that, because maybe that person's being thoughtless. Maybe that person's being a jerk. Maybe that person's like trying to get at you or whatever, or is just being selfish or whatever. Or maybe that person has a social disability. So that's a weird place to sort of like end it off right there. Let me say, does anybody have any questions related to autism or my work at the center or neurodivergence in general? Yes, please. So there's a lot of people, she asked, for in case you guys didn't hear that on Zoom, she asked, what is it with level 3 autism? How do the levels work and stuff? As human beings, we love to categorize things and put everything in a nice, neat little box. And for those of you who know about autism, you often hear about it as the autism spectrum. When I was first diagnosed and first researching autism, I remember at the time thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if 15, 20 years from now, what we call autism today will actually be like 5 or 6 different things that just happen to look kind of similar to each other. I didn't know for sure, but it wouldn't have shocked me. I don't think that anymore, because there's still a lot that science does not understand about autism. It's still a very active field of research. And I give science a bit of a pass. We make up about 2% of the population. Most of us are not formally diagnosed. Many of us don't even realize we're autistic. I mean, we know we're weird. We know we struggle with things other people don't struggle with, but we don't realize that there's a label. How do you research a population like that, like a ninja population that spreads in with everybody else? So there are 3 basic levels of autism. I would be considered level 1 autism, which has some support needs. The level 3 has significant or severe support needs. Most people who are level 3 on the spectrum are probably nonverbal or very minimally verbal, probably has moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, moderate to severe sensory processing disorder. As I said before, these are people who are probably not going to live independent lives. They have significant support needs. Level 1s could be like average or even above average intelligence. Some of the smartest human beings in human history were most likely autistic. So autism can run anywhere across the IQ gambit. Knowing that somebody's autistic doesn't really say anything about their intelligence. In fact, a lot of autistic people get, and I'm spared from this because I'm on the hyperverbal end of the spectrum, but most autistic people have some trouble with speaking. Actually, I do too. It just doesn't happen to me very often. And I usually try to stay away from people when it happens. But one of my favorite examples of this is Dan Berger, a friend of mine who worked at Vanderbilt University, extraordinarily smart guy. He might be smarter than me. He's a really, really, really sharp guy. He worked on a dozen projects at once. He had an idea one day and created his own data visualization tool that is now used by NASA. Very important fundamental discoveries were made through this tool. And yet when you talk to him, there's a very weird cadence to his voice. And it might take him 30 seconds to say a simple one syllable sentence composed of 1 syllables. And I know people who interact with him or people who hear him talk probably assume that his IQ is way below average, when in fact his IQ is actually way above average. So if you think about what we do know about autism, what we do know is that all human beings, when we're infants, when we're babies, these neural connections growing through our brains, they're just like too many. They go like wild brush. They just grow all over the place. And then within the first few months of our life, there's this pruning process that shaves those down to sort of like highways and side roads and stuff that form most human brains. Autistic individuals, we have some sort of problem with that pruning process. And so we end up with too many connections. When you think about it from that perspective, suddenly the spectrum makes a lot of sense. The only real difference between me and a level 3 on the spectrum is I got lucky that my too many connections weren't too terribly crippling. But one of the interesting things about the too many connections is that we do get families of traits like sensory processing issues, social difficulties. Obviously, those highways and byways in a typically developing brain obviously play a huge part in social interaction and our ability to form connections with one another and be a part of a group. So obviously having too many connections, that's almost one of the most universal things about autism, is that we all struggle with like social disabilities and stuff. Interestingly enough, there are some gender differences too with autism. Women on the spectrum are generally more sociable than their male counterparts, and they also have much higher levels of stress and anxiety. We don't know the exact cause for that, but I think one of the reasons why they have so much stress and anxiety, and I've talked to a lot of autistic women and they nod their heads emphatically when I say this, is that they have a stronger drive to be social, but they are keenly aware of their own inadequacies. If I can give you an example of that. A lot of times when I'm interacting with a group of people, there's a lot that's happening and I have no idea what's going on. But I know if I let other people realize how clueless I am, that at best, they're more likely to exclude me or pull away from the group, or at worst, try to take advantage of me, because when they realize how gullible I am. I have two choices when you tell me something. I can believe you, or I can go crawl into a ditch and live there the rest of my life. Like, those are my two options. I can't really judge the honesty or the sincerity of your words. It's like basically like a coin toss. And when people realize just how easily manipulable we are, they tend to take advantage of us, particularly women, or especially women have had some pretty egregious things happen as kind of a result. But it's difficult to sort of like categorize that. And so they've come up with these three basic levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. And so basically, if you're on the level 1 end of the spectrum, you probably have like average or maybe even above average IQ. You're probably verbal, or at least somewhat verbal, or even if you're not very verbal, you're able to communicate in like complete sentences in other ways through like writing or some of those assistant devices that some nonverbal people use. You might have some learning disabilities or learning differences and stuff, but nothing too severe. And then a level 2 is just a mix and match of those two. There's a famous saying in the autism world: if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because it's such a multivariable condition that I could get another level 1 autistic individual here who is a physicist, and we might be very different in a lot of ways. Like, I have extreme sensory issues. When I was first diagnosed, it's one of the things that helped me to accept in myself that I really was autistic. The next time I had a sensory meltdown, I had a language for describing, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what's been documented. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm obviously autistic. I've worked with enough autistic people to realize my sensory issues are greater than 99%, at least among the men. I find women on the spectrum, they seem to have more sensory issues than their male peers. But of the people I've documented about 400 autistic adults that I've talked to, and of those, I've met one guy on the spectrum who has sensory issues as bad as me. And I've met like about a dozen women on the spectrum with issues as bad as mine. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yes.
You have a few questions on Zoom. The first one is, do you have any ideas on how to spread awareness about ASD to law enforcement and other areas of authority?
Yeah, so trying to get the word out to law enforcement is actually a very important point. You guys are, I'm assuming, doing you guys are going to classes and stuff for like social work and stuff like that. So you guys are probably already aware of some of these really horrible, famous examples of an autistic adult where the cop doesn't recognize that the kid's autistic, and they end up pepper spraying them and doing all sorts of horrible things and stuff. There are a number of nonprofits and stuff that are reaching out to police departments and stuff. I would say where you're at, probably the first thing to do if you're important about reaching out to law enforcement is look for any nonprofits in your area that work with autism. And so like here in Tennessee, Autism Tennessee is a big one, and by no means that's the only one. That one happens to be my favorite because it's one of the only organizations that doesn't just work with kids. They actually work with adults as well. And people in the field of like helping autistic people and like special education and stuff like that. Psychologist. If you're a 6-year-old on the spectrum, there are a lot of psychologists out there that you can work with, therapists and stuff, to kind of help you learn some of the things that you got to learn and try to manage. We can have extreme emotional reactions to things, and we kind of struggle with our own emotions. I'm pretty good with simple emotions like joy or anger or fear, but humans have like a lot of like really more complex, nuanced emotions. And when I feel those emotions, often they're like really strong and very confusing for me. And so I'm feeling something very strong and I'm confused. It's not a fun kind of state to be in. So having a professional to like help me try to work through that stuff would have been really awesome when I was growing up. But a lot of them only work with children. And I'm having the hardest time convincing them that kids who need help grow up to become adults who need help. Thankfully, we're seeing some recent work into that. But yeah, my suggestion is that if you're if you're passionate about that sort of thing, you reach out to some nonprofits, connect to them. They're probably already doing efforts towards that end, or they might even get you in contact with some resources. Like say, if you reach Autism Tennessee and they go, oh yeah, we do that for Nashville. And you're like, well, I'm in Murfreesboro. How could I do this here? Maybe they already have a program in place. Maybe they have a speaker or something that can kind of work and reach out. Don't try to solve the world's problems by yourselves. There's other people kind of working on this. In fact, anything autism related or neurodivergence related for that matter, feel free to reach out to us at the Frist Center. We field questions from the public all the time, and we'll try to point you towards some resources. We've gotten pretty good at it. Yeah, so this is probably one of the most common questions I get from the public when they're reaching out to us. The first bit of advice I give an adult who's seeking a formal diagnosis is that as soon as you find a therapist or a psychologist who says, yes, I can give a diagnosis, you ask them 2 questions. 1, how many adults on the spectrum have you already diagnosed? 2, how many adults on the spectrum have you worked with? And if the answer to both those questions combined is 0 or 1 or 2, in your brain, you move them from professional to amateur and you keep looking, because that person cannot give you an accurate diagnosis or is very unlikely to give you an accurate diagnosis. I know I've talked to some psychologists and they make kind of a pain face, but I'll get right in their face and say, look, you can't diagnose autism by just reading a few pages in a book. It's kind of confusing. It's sort of nuanced, but people who have worked professionally for years with autistic adults, over time, they get to start to spot some of the more subtle signs and stuff. They know not just what questions to ask, but in what ways to ask it. I wish we could just like do a blood test or a brain scan or something and then just know what flavor of human we're dealing with, but we're not there yet. And unfortunately, you know, it's even worse if you're biological female. There is a male to female disparity in autism. If you look at the extreme end, the level 3 end, where it's really easy to diagnose, it's about a 2 to 1. For every 2 males, there's one female on the spectrum. But if you go to level 1, that 2 to 1 becomes a 10 to 1. And what many of us in the research world strongly suspect, and I include myself among them, it's probably actually closer to 2 to 1. But the test is also sort of male biased. A lot of the standard test out there for getting a formal diagnosis is designed off the stereotypical ways that males express autism, and women don't necessarily express it that way. But if you were a woman who is seeking a formal diagnosis, that's another reason why you find a professional who's done more than 0 or 1 or 2 diagnoses, because they will keenly be aware of it, because that's their specialty. And this has been a huge debate for the last few years now in those spheres.
Okay, so the next question is, what accommodations do you have at your workplace, if any, that you think can be applied to other organizations to help those with an autism diagnosis?
Yes, so accommodations. This is one of the most common things I'm talking to companies and businesses and stuff about is accommodations. And one of the first things I stress to them is, look, all human beings need accommodations. We just don't call them accommodations when everybody needs them. So this classroom, the lighting level, the temperature, the volume at which we talk to each other, even the language where we have to speak in a somewhat professional way. This has all been designed to accommodate human beings. If the lighting is too bright or too dim, or it's too hot or too cold, or I'm up here like shouting obscenities or insulting you, or I'm speaking so softly that you can't hear a word I say, like this would not be a good learning environment for you. So all human beings need accommodations. People who are wired a bit differently than everybody else sometimes need some accommodations for them to thrive just like the rest of us. And most accommodations that autistic and neurodivergent people need are not expensive, and they're not even hard to do. You know, let me take sensory issues is an obvious one. I have extreme sensory processing disorder, and it's highly, highly variable. There are some days I cannot leave the house. There's some days where somebody could cough and it could trigger a cascading cognitive meltdown. And then I'm laid out for the next couple of days. Other days I'm freaking sensory bulletproof. And today feels more like a bulletproof day. I'm looking at the bright sun and the wind and all the people moving around. And I'm like, this is fine. This isn't bothering me at all. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it because I don't always get to experience that. But one of the accommodations I've always been seeking out ever since I got my formal diagnosis and I had a language with which to use to ask for accommodation is that, look, some days I'm going to need to be wearing earbuds or noise canceling headsets. I have to do that to sort of like filter out noises, or the volume might be just too much. I might have to come in wearing shades. If you go to the Frist Center and you go back into my office, you're going to find a sensory oasis with very soft, gentle lighting. It's almost like nap time, but just enough light so you can still kind of see and stuff. We work with a lot of autistic individuals at Vanderbilt University, and they all know that they can always duck into my office when they're looking for a sensory safe space to just sort of like decompress and stuff. So sensory issues is an obvious one. A not so obvious one is communication and interaction. I have devoted so much of my life to studying normal people and trying to figure out why do they do all the bizarre things that they do, and how can I interact with them in a way that I can understand what they're trying to tell me and they can understand what I'm trying to tell them, so we can meet a basis of communication and work together. I devoted my whole life to that. I'm somewhat okay at it. Most autistic people have not had the sort of opportunities or experience that I have. So they can be a bit abrasive. They can be rough around the edges. They can be somewhat antisocial and stuff. Plus also they tend to, by the time they get to college age, a lot of them can be very skittish around people. You know, just imagine if you lived in a world where when you interacted with people, it's like rolling the dice. It's almost like playing hopscotch in a minefield where you can't look down. Like the conversation's going great, you're having the time of your life, we're all together and we're interacting, and then suddenly people are yelling at you and they're furious at you and they're trying to get other people to attack you and stuff, and you have no idea what happened. You have no idea where things went sideways and stuff. And so the biggest thing I stress to people is that if you think you have a neurodivergent classmate or student or coworker or whatever, recognize that communication and miscommunication are very likely happening. I think the number one thing that level ones struggle with in the workplace and in the academic setting is misunderstandings and miscommunications, where we misunderstand other people and they misunderstand us. You know, we use very precise, detail-oriented language. We spell things out in a very step-by-step sort of manner. From our perspective, you guys have this amazing ability to just yada yada with vague language and just figure it out. And it's like, how can you even do it? It looks like a superpower to me, where a teacher, and some subjects are worse than other subjects. I think it's one of the reasons why I was attracted to math and science. Math and science, very precise definitions, very precise step by step. Oh, I could get that. We're on the same page. And then you have an English assignment where they're like, you know, write 3 paragraphs detailing what was off about this short story we read. And then we're like, what do you mean what was off about the short story? I read it, I understood it. What do you mean by off? Like these very vague hand wavy sort of instructions and stuff. So if you're communicating to someone that you think might be neurodivergent and they're looking at you like you grew a third eye, or they just seem to not be getting it, or they seem to be asking inane questions, that could be because no matter how clear you thought you were, they may not realize it, or it may not be as clear to them as you think it is. And the best piece of advice I could give you for talking to a neurodivergent person, imagine you're texting them and you don't have emojis. Now suddenly you're a lot more careful about your language, right? You can't say something that could potentially be offensive and then put a little raspberry face at the end of it to show, I'm just joking. I'm just joshing you. I'm not being serious and stuff. You know, try to put some thought and effort to make sure that you're saying what you mean, that the words, the definitions of the words and the orders of the words actually match what you're kind of saying. It's not as clever. It's not as witty. It's not as fun. From my perspective, most human beings, it seems at times the words don't mean anything. You're just making noise like birds. And then all the actual communication is happening with like the body language and stuff like that. which is cool if you can do that. If you can understand each other when you're talking to each other like that, that's fantastic. But for those of us who can't, we're often left in the dark. I can't tell you how many times I've been with a group of people, somebody say something, everybody starts smiling, nodding their heads, giving each other side eye. You know what I do? I smile, I nod my head, throw out some side eye. I have no idea why we're doing this. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. But I do know that if I mimic them, they feel like I'm a part of them and I'm a part of the group and I get treated like as part of the group. But a lot of that I'm not getting myself. So if you can put some thought and effort in speaking more directly with folks, it's going to be a huge help. Now, on the flip side, we need help too. Okay, because we can monkey stomp on people's feelings without even realizing it and stuff. And sometimes somebody needs to pull us aside and say, hey, the way you said that right now was very, very insulting, very, very offensive. You got to be careful with the way you say that. What were you trying to say? Yeah. You needed a 1 and you brought a 10. That was like way too much. Like maybe if you said it this way, this would work better. Or you should just never bring up that topic at all in this sort of setting and stuff. Oh, you talked about it with your friends on Fortnite the other night. That's great. That's Fortnite talk. You can't have that kind of talk in this sort of setting and stuff. Like we need people to help us set those boundaries. A lot of times people just say, you can't say that. And then they don't explain to us why you can't say that. And then it doesn't make any sense to us. You know, here's the thing, just imagine, you know, I can be very blunt and direct. You know, if I'm walking down the street and well, this analogy doesn't work so well anymore because I lost like 40 pounds, but about 40 pounds ago, you know, if I was walking down the street and someone walked up to me and said, I think you're fat, I'd have been like, yeah, I'm a little overweight. I could probably lose some pounds. At no point would I be like, oh my God, how dare you? Like, it just wouldn't occur to me. And so, you know, the worst advice you give an autistic people is treat people the way you want to be treated. That's awful, terrible advice for me. I have to stop and think before I talk to you about, is anything I'm about to say or do, could it trigger you? Could it upset you? Could it offend you? That's so much harder to do if it wouldn't upset or offend me. You know, there's a lot of things that people are talking about that now on an intellectual level, I understand. They catch feelings. You say this in this certain way or in this certain, it makes people upset. It gets people offended. We shouldn't be upsetting and offending people. I should be avoiding that. Like intellectually, I understand that, but on an emotional level, it doesn't make any sense to me. But I still need to put in the work to be a decent human being and try not to stomp on people's feelings. And believe me, I want to. You know, when best example I can give for this story, I was 19 years old. I was in the Army. There's an 18-year-old couple next door. They just had a baby. Difficult birth. They had to use like a suction cup to get the baby's head out. You guys ever seen the movie Alien? The baby's head was shaped like that, but it was sideways, like banana. Now it's fine. The skull is highly malleable. Within 6 months, the baby looked like a perfectly normal baby. But this new mom walks into my apartment with this baby with the banana head in her hands and walks up to me while I'm working on the computer. And she said, what do you think of my baby? And I said, my God, that is the ugliest thing I have ever seen in my life. And she exploded into tears and fled my apartment. I was stunned. I thought about it for several minutes. Why did she react that way? That didn't make any sense to me. Why would she ask me a question if she didn't want to know the answer? And then at the time, you know, like I didn't hardly understand anything about people back then. So I was like, okay, this is just another one of those many, many things that when someone asks you a question, you go, oh, and you nod your head and you don't really say anything. That was my default. It was years later, years and years and years later, before I finally started to understand people enough. And one of my biggest mistakes I made is that people do not say what they mean. And you have to translate what people are saying into what they actually mean. And she was not asking what I thought about her baby. What she was really saying to me as a fellow member of my herd, of my community, I'm letting you know I'm feeling a little vulnerable right now. I have this new human being that means everything to me. And I want you to look at this human being and affirm that it is a part of our group and it has a value and it has a place in our tribe. That's what she was really saying to me. And then I thoughtlessly said, the ugliest thing I ever saw in my life. When I actually finally comprehended what I'd actually done to her, it broke my heart. That's one of the worst things about being autistic, is that I stomp on people's feelings and stuff all the time without meaning to. I don't want to cause any harm in my life. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't have hatred in myself for people. I don't have a desire to see people get their comeuppance or whatever. You know, if I don't like you, I want you to go do your own thing and I'll go do my own thing. But I'm wishing ill. Like the amount of emotional harm that I've done to other people, like really upsets me. It really does. You know, I want to be good at something I'm just not naturally good at. But I can get there with help from my community and from other people, like looking out for me and talking to me and guiding me and stuff. And I'm as good at human interaction today as I am because I've had those people that help. And I'm sorry, I turned that into a huge rant. We Aspies can sometimes get a little ranty. Well, I don't even remember what the question was anymore. That's embarrassing.
Very good. Any advice on dealing with failure or rejection?
Yes. I mean, I think this is probably not just true for autistic people, but for all people. So one of the downsides about autism is we can be very rigid. We have a plan. Sometimes it has to be overly detailed and step by step and has to work, but then we hit a stumbling block. And humans have this amazing ability to be adaptable and just kind of figure it out. But a lot of times we just kind of get stuck. And we have this flaw of, if I don't see the next step, that next step does not exist. When I chose to go to college and give this college thing a try, like when I chose my major, I chose English because I've been a journalist for 7 years and I knew how to write. So I could imagine myself writing essays. So I restricted my choice of academia down to something I already knew how to do because it was the only thing I could imagine. Like I couldn't imagine myself being anything else because I just didn't have enough information. And I work with autistic like grad students and undergrad students and people who are struggling with all sorts of stuff like this all the time. And one of the first things I stress to them is that you don't have to figure out everything yourself. You got to learn how to find somebody and ask for help. Find somebody who knows more about you than that subject and ask for help. Crowdsource it. It's one of the greatest strengths we have as a species, is that you do not have to figure it out all. If you're stuck and you don't know what to do, go seek help. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I don't know where to go from here. Could you help me out? Do at least try to solve the problem. Don't the very instant you get stuck go, oh, I'm just going to have somebody else do it for me. That's not going to get you very far. But Aspies can, I was once working on a quantum mechanics problem in grad school, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I spent 20 hours banging my head up against this problem. And then finally, after 20 hours of work, I went to my teacher and I said, look, I just can't solve this problem. I've been working on it for 20 hours. I need some help. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, you wasted 19 hours of your life. Like, that was messed up of you. Because as grad students, you've got to do research. You've got to pass all your courses and stuff. Like, your time is in a very, very tight premium. I needed somebody to tell me that. I needed somebody to say, hey, don't just keep banging your head up against a wall. You need to stop and ask for help. So it was really powerful advice to me, helped me be a better as a student. And that's the same sort of advice I give to other people now.
That's the last question.
Yes, sir. So the Frist Center, we're actually primarily a research organization. So we have teams of researchers. Like, when you think about autism research, you might think about like neuroscientists and psychologists that are studying the nuts and bolts of the autistic brain or the dyslexic brain or whatever. We have research teams doing that kind of stuff, looking at things. We're trying to find better ways to measure like visual spatial awareness. One of the things that autistic people often have at or above the general population is superior pattern recognition skills. There are some complex patterns that most people might spend like an hour digging through, trying to find some subtle variation in a pattern, where some autistic people can just glance at it and instantly see. There's a guy making a really good living at UBS. He just pours through tens of thousands of emails a day, and he just occasionally flags them. And the ones that he flags goes to an entire team and an entire floor of the building. that pour through the ones that he's flagged, and he saves the company millions and millions of dollars a year in fraud, waste, and abuse. And it's just, he can very quickly and succinctly spot subtle variations in patterns. So we're studying things like that, trying to figure out what are the cognitive strengths, what are the, ideally, when we figure those out, how can we match those to jobs? But we also have researchers in the Department of Engineering that are looking at technologies and innovations. There is a driving simulator that we're working on, that we've been working on for a number of years to teach autistic teens how to drive. Most autistic, a very large percentage of autistic adults do not have a driver's license. It turns out like the normal way of teaching to drive does not work well for us. And so a lot of us end up not getting our driver's license, which is unfortunate because as a population, we're some of the safest drivers out there. It turns out if you're a bit of a rules lawyer and follow the rules and do what you're supposed to do, you're less likely to be in an accident. But we also, we're also doing an interview simulator because we're famously really bad at job interviews. I only recently learned this a few years ago, and it still seems absurd to me. I didn't realize that everybody lies in the job interviews. Like we're honest to a fault, and we'll actually go a little bit above and beyond in our honesty just to make sure that we don't even unintentionally mislead you on any of our weaknesses or struggles. And the whole time that interviewer is thinking that's the rosy version, that we're actually even worse than what we're saying. So we do some job interview simulators and stuff, and also the language. We have to learn how to translate. You know, if I'm being interviewed at a job and they say, where do you see yourself in this company in 5 years? That's an impossible question. I can't answer that question. I don't know if I'm going to like the company. I don't know if I'm going to get hired. How on earth can I answer that question? I'm not Nostradamus. I can't see into the future. But I know now, oh yeah, you don't know how to use language properly. I have to translate that to where would I like to be in 5 years if I enjoyed working at this company? That's a question I can answer. And so we can get very stressed and anxious because we're taking the literal definitions of questions. So we've got some like an AI driven job interview where an AI is asking questions and then it's got voice recognition, and then it's playing off of that. So it's hooked up to biometrics. So presumably a job coach can then afterwards say, I noticed in question 3, your anxiety level spiked. Let's have a conversation. Why were you so, what was it about that question that really freaked you out? And then kind of like strategize and help this person. So when they do actually go to a job interview, our first 30 seconds are our worst, and yet most HR folks have made up their mind within like the first 30 seconds or discounted somebody within the first 30 seconds. So helping us to be better at that. And at the same time, we're also working with those HR companies to educate them about that. Say, hey, you can't judge us in the first 30 seconds. Yeah. And I'll just say one thing more, and then I'll get to that next part of the question. And a third branch of our research is in the business school. What sort of technologies and changes, ways of doing things do we change the workplace? How do we better train the next generation of leaders? There are some companies out there that are already sold on the autistic potential. They look at Silicon Valley and all the millionaires and billionaires who are on the spectrum there, and they're like, where do I get some of that outside the box thinking? I want that outside the box thinking. Yeah, we're happy to help them with that. But the thing is, outside the box thinking doesn't work so well if you just try to jam it in the box with everybody else. You gotta be a little bit more. So we're taking a multidisciplinary approach from the research. That's primarily what we do. We're a research center. But obviously, in order to do that research, we have to have a lot of partnerships with companies and corporations and businesses and nonprofits. Basically, everyone who's a stakeholder that could potentially have an impact on autism and employment, we're engaged in and we're kind of working with. So on the one hand, we're doing research, and then we're taking best practices and stuff, and we're kind of sharing that with these companies. Some of the best practices we're getting from companies, Specialist Sterna, over 75% of their employees are on the spectrum, and that company's been around for nearly 20 years now. Most of their employees have now been working like 10, 15 years, full-time, professional paid, graduate level work. Specialist Sterna, it's Danish for the specialist. Most of those employees had never had a full-time job before that. One guy got his master's degree and was like spent 10 years looking for a job. Yes. Yes. So So neurodiverse kind of calls out the fact that there's no such thing as a normal human brain. There's variability in all of us. Brain differences are normal and healthy. So we're all neurodiverse. Everybody here is neurodiverse. But neurodivergence, I like to compare and contrast it with neuromajority, which is my own term. So if you try to look that up, you're probably not going to find it. Autistic people call it neurotypical, but I find a lot of neurotypical people find that offensive, and I'm trying to be respectful of other people's feelings. I think neuromajority is more accurate. The definition of neuromajority is that your wiring, the way your brain functions, is similar enough to most people that you can kind of connect and communicate effectively with little difficulty. Personality conflict aside. Neurodivergent means that you're wired differently enough that you struggle with things that most people do not struggle with, and you might have gifts greater than that of what most people have. Right. So neurodivergent autism is an example of neurodivergence. Other types of neurodivergence are dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADD, ADHD, Tourette syndrome. There's probably some that are so rare out there that we don't even have a name for it. Bob. Bob might have a very unique neurodivergent sort of brain. Einstein was most likely on the autism spectrum when you look at his childhood and the things about him. And what I particularly love about Einstein as an example in my work is that Einstein got his Ph.D., could not get a job as a physicist. It's just too weird. Ends up through some family friends and stuff, getting a job as a patent clerk. And then as a patent clerk, after he published his second Nobel Prize winning paper that changed the face of physics as we knew it, a lot of the research institutions was like, wow, the greatest physicist of our age is a patent clerk. Maybe we should offer him a job. Maybe you should be a physicist. That's how awesome he had to be to even sort of get a job. So it really kind of speaks to some of the challenges how autistic people have, trying to find meaningful employment. Newton could have been on the spectrum, or Newton could have been just his own weird flavor, but he was absolutely neurodivergent. A lot of the big people who make these new discoveries and stuff are quite likely neurodivergent. Yes, please.
So what can you kind of curb, I guess, the stereotypes?
Yeah, and I always feel ambivalent about stereotypes because I understand where they come from. We live in a complex world, and being able to make snap judgment decisions about things, kind of you need sort of an imperfect mental model to sort of predict all these different things that are happening. So stereotypes in some limited degree can be useful, but the problem is that humans just take those stereotypes and they try to form them into hard laws. And so as someone who has a stereotype of autism, it becomes oh, if you don't fit in this box, I will not consider you autistic. I will not treat you autistic. That's where we go wrong, is we cling to our simplicities and then we kind of hold on to them a little too hard. I think the best way to treat autism is the best way to treat any individual, which is just try to bother to get to know this person and how they roll, and try to establish meaningful two-way dialogue and kind of go from there. One of the most common things I hear from supervisors who actually work in these companies that specialize in hiring autistic talent, supervisor finds out he's going to have an entire team of autistic adults. The number one thing they say when they first find out is that they're terrified. They have no idea how it could go. They might say or do something that leads to, they don't know much about autism. Our ignorance can be terrifying to us sometimes. And then the second most common thing I hear from them is that they're actually blown away at how easy it is to actually work with autistic people. We're not complicated. If you understand that we use language precisely and you put some care and thought into saying what you mean, and if we say something that comes across as a little blunt or rude or direct, don't jump to conclusions, but just recognize, hey, that's just how we communicate. If it's too much over the top, pull us aside and have a conversation. We could use help on our phrasing and stuff. But don't just immediately assume that we're attacking or we're trying to be a jerk or whatever. And then one of the most crazy things for me is that I've heard this like a dozen times. And they're like, I can't believe how hardworking and loyal they are. And I'm like, you're talking about a person who, like, most people do not understand them, and most people make bad assumptions about them and treat them harshly. And then they get into a workplace where they're treated with dignity and respect, and the boss is communicating them in a way that makes sense. The boss seems to be able to accurately interpret what they're saying. Of course, they're hardworking and loyal. Like, that's probably the first time they found a professional setting like that. If they leave that job, would they ever find that again? You would be hardworking and loyal if that was as rare as it was in your world. It amazes me that they're surprised by that. I hope that answered the question. Okay. It answered it in my mind, but thank you. Does anybody have any other questions?
Or maybe there's one, but what are the challenges that you face at the center?
When you say what are some challenges we face at the center? Yes, I mean, it's a pretty big challenge because there's like I said, over 80% of people on the autism spectrum are unemployed or underemployed. One of the biggest challenges I face is really the invisible disability. Is that, like, it's not a tough sell to convince you guys that there are people out there with neurological differences that might look and walk and talk and act like a normal person, but actually are having invisible disabilities, invisible struggles and stuff, and get you to kind of like open your hearts to that a little bit and kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. But out in the working world, it's a much tougher slog. And in some cultures in particular, I'm noticing, like in rural parts of the country, it's pretty hard. My own brother is salty that I am an expert that works with autistic adults, because he thinks everybody is a little autistic. And I hit him with the facts and figures and stuff, and he's like, fake news. So like people like that, it's really kind of hard. So sometimes I will come across companies and stuff that have like boss managers that are like that, supervisors or CEOs and stuff that are like, their answer to if you're struggling is suck it up, buttercup. Suck it up, buttercup is not always a viable solution. 80% unemployment, like that's not an accident. That is autistic people struggling in a work environment that is unwilling or unable to accommodate them and stuff. But thankfully, more and more there are companies that do want to try and help these folks. And so those we focus all of our efforts on where it could actually do some good. I'm not going to spin my wheels trying to convince my brother. He's free to believe whatever he wants. He believes some pretty crazy things too. Did that answer your question? Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me out here and letting me chat about this kind of stuff. Most of the time I'm giving this talk to like Google or some tech firm or some company or something. I found myself in the academic setting. It's in academia is where I first really like sort of blossomed. Academia in particular, particularly in the STEM fields, I really connected with human beings on a level I hadn't connected with before. And I think part of that is because there's no such thing as a perfectly normal scientist. All scientists are a little weird. And I think it's because most people do not wake up one day and say, you know what, germs. I want to devote the next 50 years of my life to learning everything there is to know about germs. I want to do research in it. It's all I want to think about. That level of obsession and focus, most people do not have that. But I find like around scientists and academic types and stuff, like I can get really geeky about my fields of topic and stuff. And even if they're not geeky about the same sort of thing, they have a lot of respect for it. They can empathize because they got their own things that they're geeky and obsessed with. And I really sort of like thrived in that sort of setting. So I do like being a researcher, but I do miss being able to go to classes and just learn a bunch of things all the time. I really miss that. So I think that's it. I think we're good. Nobody has any more questions? Thank you so much.
Well, I tell you, coming from online, there's a lot of thank yous. This was great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, make sure, if you haven't already, make sure you signed in. And thank you so much for coming today. And I'll see my class.